Hi, welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Before we get into today's episode, I need to issue a correction on last week's episode, The Beach Boys 1969 Part 2. Toward the end of that episode, I said that the 2020 track, Never Learn Not to Love, had originally been issued as the B-side of Do It Again in July of 1968. Viewer Frank Allison and a number of others were quick to point out, correctly, that it was actually the B-side of Bluebirds Over the Mountain in December of 1968, and that the B-side of Do It Again was, of course, Wake the World from the Friends album. Sorry about that, talking off the top of my head and got it wrong. Thanks for catching that and appreciate the comment to correct it. Now, today, we are going to carry on from episode 37, Bruce Before Terry. In that episode, we got as far as talking about the early collaborations between Terry Melcher and Bruce Johnston, including the Surfin' Around the World album from August of 1963. Surfin' Around the World was issued on the Columbia record label, which had just signed Terry Melcher as a producer for Teen Product. Terry's first signing for the label was his old acquaintance, Bruce Johnston, who also became a house producer for Teen Product at Columbia. Up to this point, Bruce's recording history is complicated. Once he's at Columbia with Terry, it gets really Byzantine. So I'm going to do the best I can to get through this. And this is an area where people that really know this stuff, I would appreciate them chiming in. Now, I know there's a lot of things I'm going to leave out, a lot of sessions Bruce did, a lot of backing vocals, some things that he wrote. I'm only going to be able to hit the high points because there's just too much. It'd take forever to get through all of the things that Bruce Johnston did, and even then I'm sure there would be a lot I'd be leaving out. We'll try to hit the high points and let me know if I miss any. Terry was something of an anomaly at Columbia Records. Since the 1950s, the head of A&R at Columbia had been Mitch Miller, who was fabulously popular in the late 50s and early 60s. He had a hit TV series on NBC called Sing Along with Mitch. He had a string of hit Sing Along with Mitch albums credited to Mitch Miller and the Gang. In every sense, Mitch Miller in the late 50s and early 60s was a household name. Incidentally, if I'm ever jumped by a gang in a dark alley, I hope it's the Mitch Miller gang, who will just make me sing along with them on My Gal Sal and Shine on Harvest Moon and stuff like that. But anyway, Mitch Miller famously hated rock and roll. He'd assembled a roster at Columbia Records that consisted of the likes of Ray Conniff, Rosemary Clooney, Johnny Mathis, Jerry Vale, and not coincidentally, Terry Melcher's mother, Doris Day, who had produced a lot of hits for the label in the 1950s. They did have a few acts that appealed to the younger set. They had Dion, they had Paul Revere and the Raiders, though it would be a few years before Paul Revere and the Raiders would produce any hits for the label. And they also had, I don't think you can really call it a teen signing, but they did have popular folk singer Bob Dylan. Mitch Miller seems to have been one of those music industry professionals at the time who believed that there was no need for music to change, that rather the audience would change, that as teenagers grew up, they'd stop listening to surf records and drag racing records, that no self-respecting person over the age of about 22 would ever listen to a rock and roll record, and that they would just grow into listening to Ray Conniff and Rosemary Clooney and that type of music. On the other hand, there was clearly some money to be made in the teen market, and Terry Melcher was signed to produce Teen Product for the Columbia label. Terry says it was actually a great thing. Nobody there knew anything about teen music. Nobody cared anything about teen music, basically. So they kind of let him get on with it and do whatever he wanted. Terry, of course, quickly brought in Bruce as both an artist and a producer. And the two of them both have confirmed in interviews what should be obvious. This was a great period in their lives. They'd kind of been handed the keys to the kingdom to make records, which is exactly what they wanted to do. They were allowed to learn their craft, learn how to produce, arrange, write, sing, everything with very little oversight on Columbia Records' dime. It must have been a great position to be in. One of the very next things that Terry Melcher did was sign a group called The Opposites, who consisted of Phil Stewart and Ernie Bringus, a duo that had come to the attention of Terry through Arwen Records, which was a label owned by his stepfather, Terry Melcher, and his mother, Doris Day. Terry quickly had them ditch the name The Opposites and rename them the Rip Chords, with chords spelled with an H, so it's a musical pun and a much better name for the duo. This is where the story gets complicated. In a lot of the early things I read, I was under the impression that the Rip Chords was just Bruce and Terry under another name. As with most things, the real story is a lot more complicated, so let's try to get through it. Before we unravel the Rip Chords, so to speak, let's talk about a shift that was occurring in music in the fall of 1963. That's 2 puns in 1 sentence for anybody that's keeping track. July of 1963 had brought the Surf City and Other Swingin' Cities album from Jan and Dean. August, of course, had brought Bruce Johnston's Surfin' Around the World. And September had brought the Beach Boys' Surfer Girl album. October 1963 brought Little Coupe by the Beach Boys. November brought the single release Drag City, with the album Drag City to follow in January of 1964. Also in November of 1963, the single Hey Little Cobra, with the album Hey Little Cobra and Other Hot Rod Hits following in February of 1964. So you can see somebody issued a memo somewhere apparently around October of 1963 that surfing was done and drag racing was in. Now obviously there were car songs before this and there were surfing songs after, but there was a real marked shift in focus there in the fall of 1963. Obviously this change in focus was not lost on either Terry or Bruce and would have a major impact on the way the Rip Chords recording career subsequently developed. Stewart and Bringus, the Rip Chords, had already contributed backing vocals to Bruce and Terry's project, the Hot Doggers' Surfin' USA album earlier in the year. And released right around the same time as Bruce's Surfin' Around the World album, the Rip Chords single Gone, with She Thinks I Still Care on the B-side, had of course been produced by Terry with backing vocals by Bruce, and the A-side Gone was a Melcher Johnston composition. The real breakthrough for the Rip Chords, of course, came with the song Hey Little Cobra. This song seems to feature vocals by Bruce and Terry rather than Stewart and Bringus. Bruce Johnston has said that he and Terry sang the major Rip Chord songs because they were the more experienced singers. Additionally, I think that there was a matter of convenience. It was hard to get Stewart and Bringus into the studio. Bruce and Terry were already there. They were eager to finish up the record, so they just go ahead and sing the lead vocals themselves. Terry is the lead on Hey Little Cobra, but Bruce's vocal is very prominently featured. It was a big success. It was a number 4 hit early in 1964 and brought the Rip Chords national attention. Stewart and Bringus apparently remained the official recording Rip Chords. However, Bruce and Terry's vocals feature prominently on many of the recordings. When the Hey Little Cobra and Other Hot Rod Hits album was released in January of 1964, it was a mix of vocals, with 5 lead vocals by Terry Melcher, 5 by Ernie Bringus, and 1 by Phil Stewart. The Hey Little Cobra and Other Hits album also features compositions by Terry Melcher and Bruce Johnston, The Queen, which had also appeared as the B-side of the Hey Little Cobra single, Trophy Machine, the aforementioned Gone, and 44 to Time. Just to complicate matters further, there was also a touring version of the Rip Chords that had a different lineup from the recording version of the Rip Chords. Ernie Bringus was studying for the ministry and consequently was unavailable to tour. So the touring Rip Chords were Phil Stewart along with Rich Rotkin and Arnie Marcus. The 3 of them appear on the second Rip Chords album, Window Coupe. Rotkin and Marcus apparently never appeared on any of the albums apart from the album cover, and the vocals continued to be a mix of Bruce, Terry, Phil Stewart, and Ernie Bringus. Here's a publicity still showing both the recording and touring lineups of the Rip Chords. Left to right, that's Stewart, Marcus, Rotkin, and Bringus. And though it looks like they were caught using the men's room, I think they're actually trying to show off their cool Cobra jackets in that photo. Bruce, Terry, and the Rip Chords followed up their success with Hey Little Cobra with a number 28 hit in May of 1964 with the single Window Coupe, which again prominently features Terry Melcher and Bruce Johnston on vocals. In July 1964, the second and final Rip Chords album was released, Window Coupe. Again, this is a mix of vocals from Phil Stewart, Ernie Bringus, Terry Melcher, and Bruce Johnston. The album features 6 lead vocals from Melcher, 1 with Melcher and Ernie Bringus together, and 4 from Bringus and Stewart together. As with the Hey Little Cobra album, Bruce doesn't have any lead vocals on the Window Coupe album, but is featured very prominently in the vocal mix. Unlike the Hey Little Cobra album, where Terry Melcher is listed as producer, on the Window Coupe album, production credits are Terry Melcher and Bruce Johnston. The album also features Johnston-Melcher compositions, Old Car, Made in '52, Beach Girl, Summer USA, credited to Melcher, Johnston, and Lovejoy, and Big Wednesday, credited to Melcher, Johnston, and Jacobson. Probably not coincidentally, the last Rip Chords single, Don't Be Scared, was issued in February 1965, just a few weeks after Terry Melcher began producing a new band, the Byrds, and their hit single, a cover of Bob Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man. The dynamic again had shifted away from drag racing and onto other subjects. The times indeed were a-changin'. Bruce and Terry seemed to just sort of move on to other things, and the Rip Chords kind of fell by the wayside. Of course, Bruce and Terry had also been working on other projects all during this period. I had hoped to talk about some of the other things that Bruce was involved in the Bruce and Terry singles during this period in this episode. I can see we're not going to get to that, but I do hope you found this interesting about the Rip Chords. Please comment, let me know if I left anything out. I'm sure there are some details that I'd find interesting that I'm not aware of, so if there's anybody that is really well versed on the Rip Chords, please comment. Hope you enjoyed this. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you again next week. Thanks. Bye.